We'll be talking about question number 28. We'll be treating question number 28. That's the topic, the question we'll be taking today. And the question says, a food chain always begins with a food chain always begins with a dash. Option A, consumer. Option B, decomposer. Option C, producer. And option D, primary consumer. Those are the options that we have. The question again says, a food chain always begins with a option A, consumer, B, decomposer, C, producer, and D, primary consumer. So those are the options that we have. And so for us to be able to answer that particular question, we will quickly be looking at the topic in front of us today, the topic that this particular question is emanating from, which is functioning ecosystem. Functioning ecosystem. That is the topic we'll be looking at today, functioning ecosystem. So what do we mean by functioning ecosystem? That is what we want to look at today. What we actually mean by functioning ecosystem. So before we go further, we quickly need to understand the meaning of this concept. What is ecosystem? This particular concept is what we will first of all look at. Ecosystem. So who can tell us what ecosystem is? Or in order not to waste much of our time, let me just go straight with it. When we talk about ecosystem, we're talking about the functional unit or the relationship between organisms and what the non. Okay, let me put it this way. The relationship between the living and the non-living components. When we talk about ecosystem, we're talking about the relationship between living and non-living components. So what are the living components? What are the living components? When we talk about living components, we will definitely talk about organisms that have life. Organisms that do what? Organisms that have life. So every substance or every material or every matter that possesses life, that has life, is referred to or regarded to as being what? A living component. Are we together? So, are we together?
Yes.
Good. Every substance that has the ability to what? To carry out the characteristics of living things is regarded to be as a living material or as a living substance, as a living component. So, in other words, I could refer to this definition of ecosystem as the relationship between the biotic and abiotic components. I could refer to as this ecosystem, the relationship between the biotic and the abiotic components. So this biotic here that we made mention of is also what we refer to as what? As life. You know, in biology, is divided into two words, bio and logy. The bio there means what? Life. The bio there means life. So that is where we start our what? That is where we start our the base of this topic from. So every substance that has life is referred to as what? A living component. So the relationship between the living and the non-living component is what we want to look at today. Are we together?
Yes,
So
sir.
like I said ecosystem is talking about the relationship between living and non-living components. So what is this? An ecosystem in a full definition now. An ecosystem is a basic functioning unit in nature. The basic functioning unit in nature. So this basic functioning unit is what brings about what we refer to as what? The living and the non-living components in what? In nature. Is that clear now? So ecosystem is a basic functioning unit. If it is not a relationship between the living and the non-living, then it will not be functioning. So the word functioning here is telling us that it is what? A relationship between what? Two substances, and those are the what? The biotic and the abiotic components. Are we together?
Yes,
So,
sir.
like I was saying, I said it is a relationship between the what? The biotic and the abiotic components. The biotic components, they are the ones that have what? Life in them. So examples of biotic components, we have what? Plants and animals. Examples of the what? Of the biotic components, we have organisms that have life in them. Those are what? The plants and the animals. And when we talk about the abiotic components, we're talking about those of them that do not have what? Life in them, the non-living. Are we together? So let me make this
Yes,
one,
sir.
uniform. Let me write this one too as living. So we have this one here now, the abiotic components to be the what? The non-living substances. Example, we talk about humidity, we talk about rainfall, we talk about temperature, we talk about let's say pressure, for example. We can also talk about edaphic properties. Edaphic what? Properties. When we talk about edaphic, we're actually talking about the soil. So like the soil pH, we can talk about the topography of the soil, the how slopey or steep it is. That is, so all of these are what we study under the non-living under the non-living components. So when we talk about the living components, we are talking about those substances that have life in them, while the ones that are what? Referred to as the abiotic components, they are the non-living components. So I believe that aspect of the notes or the explanation is very clear to us. So when we talk about the biotic components, there are basically some components that we'll be talking about, and those are, let's put it this way, the biotic or the living components of the ecosystem. The biotic or the living components of the ecosystem. So we're going to start with the first one, which is what? Autotroph. So what are autotrophs? What are autotrophs? Autotrophs are green plants. First and foremost, they are green plants that what? Manufacture their food by themselves. Autotrophs are green plants that manufacture their food by themselves. That is the reason why they are called what? Autotrophs, because they have the ability to manufacture their food by themselves. And so they are called the producers. So when you come across any other name, when you come across another that is another term that can be used for the autotrophs. They can also be referred to as what? As the producers. So like I said, they manufacture their food by themselves. In a process known as photosynthesis. So that is the process through which the autotrophs or the green plants or the producers, as the case might be, they manufacture their food in a process known as what? Photosynthesis. So if you were to explain what photosynthesis is, you will tell us that photosynthesis is the process by which green plants manufacture their food using nutrients in the soil, water in the soil, and the energy from the sun, the solar energy from the sun. So that is what we refer to as what? Photosynthesis. So that is the process by which autotrophs what? Manufacture their food, and that is why they are referred to as what? Autotrophs. Are we together? So like I said, when we talk about autotrophs, they are majorly what? Green plants. They are majorly green plants. So you need to understand that. So that takes us to the second component. The second component, which is what? The heterotroph. Heterotroph. So what are heterotrophs? When we talk about heterotrophs, we are talking about organisms that cannot manufacture their food, they cannot manufacture their food by themselves. Instead, they depend or rely directly or indirectly on the autotrophs. Instead, they depend directly or indirectly on the autotrophs. Now, when we talk about the heterotrophs, we are talking about organisms that have the ability to what? To feed, but they cannot manufacture their food by themselves. They cannot manufacture their food by themselves because they are not autotrophs. They are not producers. They are not green plants. So they always wait for the autotrophs to produce their food or to manufacture their food, and then they feed directly or indirectly on the autotrophs. So this is going to make us talk about the types of heterotrophs that we have. Quickly, types of the heterotrophs. Or let me not say types, let me use examples. Examples of heterotrophs. So one, or let's say Roman numeral A, we have what we refer to as the herbivores. The herbivores. What are herbivores? Herbivores are organisms that feed on plants or herbs. They feed on what? They feed on plants or herbs. Are we together? That is what herbivores are. So we have examples. Who can quickly give me an example of an herbivore? Yes, goat is an example of an herbivore. Another example? Ah, hello. All right, we have cow. So those are examples of herbivores. They feed on plants, on grasses, on herbs. So that is one. Number two, we have the ones that we refer to as the carnivores. Carnivores. These are organisms that feed on flesh. They feed on flesh. E.g., we have the dog, lions, cheetahs. We have cheetah, we have tigers, etc. So those are examples of what? Those are examples of organisms that feed on what? On dogs. Those are examples of organisms that feed on dogs, on carnivores, examples that feed on flesh. So we have the third one. And that is what? Omnivore. So that's the third group, omnivores. These are organisms that feed on both what? Plants and flesh. They feed on both plants and flesh. E.g., we have man. We have man in this category. We have pigs in this category. We have the monkeys in this category. So these are the what? The classes of what? Organisms that we have there. And then we have another one called the decomposer. Now, before we go further, let me quickly say this. Remember that I said that what? Heterotrophs are organisms that what? Feed directly or indirectly on the autotrophs. So of these three, which ones do you think are only feeding directly on the autotrophs? Which ones do you think feed directly on the autotrophs only?
Herbivores.
Yes, the herbivores are the only ones that feed directly on the what? On the autotroph. So they become, well, we get there very soon. They become a primary consumer because they are feeding directly on what? On the producers. So when we start explaining food chain and food web, you understand why I have chosen to call them what? The primary consumer. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we have talked about the herbivores, the carnivores, and the omnivores. Let us quickly look at this one called the decomposers. Decomposers. So what are decomposers? Decomposers are organisms. Decomposers are organisms that aid what? Disintegration. Organisms that aid disintegration or breakdown of matter. They are biological what? Substances that aid, or they are substances that aid what? The disintegration or the breakdown of substances. And we have different types of decomposers. We have the micro decomposers. We have the micro decomposers as well as the macro decomposers. We have the micro decomposers and the macro decomposers. The micro decomposers, we have examples of them in the fungi. E.g., we have fungi, we have bacteria as the examples of what? Of the macro decomposers. E.g., fungi and bacteria. And for the macro decomposers, we can have them in the earthworms. We have them in termites. These are what? These are macro decomposers. We have them in maggots.
Sir, is snail among?
Snail, yeah, we can also call snail. We can partially refer to a snail as a macro decomposer. Yes, because it helps in this disintegration of leaves, for example. So yes, we can call a snail a macro decomposer. We have house flies as other examples of what? Of the macro decomposers. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we have treated the autotrophs, the heterotrophs, and the decomposers. Now we know that the autotrophs are the organisms that what? Organisms that manufacture their food by themselves, isn't it? We know that autotrophs are organisms that manufacture their food by themselves, like you can see on the screen right now here. I said autotrophs are what? Grain plants that manufacture their food by themselves. They are called or known as the producers. They manufacture their food from what? A process known as photosynthesis. And that is when they make use of what? Nutrients in the soil, water in the soil, carbon dioxide, as well as the solar energy from the sun. And then we went further to talk about the heterotrophs, where we said that they are organisms that do not have the ability to manufacture their food by themselves. Hence, they depend directly or indirectly on the autotrophs. They depend directly or indirectly on the autotrophs. So that led us to talk about the examples of heterotrophs. So we listed the examples. We talked about the herbivores. We talked about the carnivores and the omnivores. The herbivores are the ones that feed they feed only on plants. And we listed examples as cow and goats. We have zebra in that class. We have elephants in that class as well. They are all what? Herbivores. We talked about the carnivores. We said they are flesh-eating what? Organisms. Organisms that feed on flesh. E.g. lions, tigers, cheetah, dogs. And then we talked about the omnivores. We said that omnivores are organisms that feed on plants and what? And flesh. They feed on the two categories, both on flesh and on flesh. Example, that is where we have man, we have pigs, we have monkeys in that what? In that category. And then we went further to talk about the decomposers. And I said that decomposers are organisms that aid disintegration or breakdown of matter. If you remember that matter can be defined as anything that has mass and occupies space. So it does not necessarily, in fact, man is a matter because human beings have mass and they have what? They occupy space, isn't it? Is that not true?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Yes,
So
sir.
man is also referred to as matter. So organisms that can bring about disintegration of any matter, they are referred to as the decomposers. Are we together? So we have two types of these decomposers. We have the micro decomposers and the macro decomposers. So for the micro decomposers, I gave examples like in the fungi and in bacteria. And then for the macro decomposers, examples we have in what? Earthworms, termites, maggots, housefly, and the rest of those. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Alright, so that is going to make us go to talk about the actual thing we want to talk about today, which is food chain. Food chain. So what is food chain? Simply put, food chain is a linear feeding relationship. Food chain is what? A linear feeding relationship. In a food chain, we're talking about the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, from one organism to another. That is what food chain is talking about. We're talking about how energy is being transferred from one organism to the next. So because this type of transfer of energy is seen in a straight line kind of reaction, that is why we refer to it as what? As linear feeding relationship. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
So we could have A going to B, going to C, going to D, and going to E. Since this is a straight line equation, since it is a straight line reaction, we call it a linear feeding relationship. Energy in A is being transferred into B, and the energy in B is transferred into C. The energy in C is transferred into D, and the energy in D is transferred subsequently into E. So the reaction is a straight line reaction, and that is why it is referred to as a linear feeding relationship. So we say that that food chain is a linear feeding relationship that transfers energy through through food from producers to consumers. Food chain is a linear feeding relationship that transfers energy through food from producers to consumers, or let me say to the final consumer. To the final consumer. So that means we could have more than one consumer, and that is talking about the trophic levels. We will get to explain that shortly. So examples of a food chain. Let us quickly see an example of a food chain. Let's use this: grass to antelope to lion. Now we have grass, antelope, and lion. Here we'll be having producer. Here we'll be having primary consumer, and this one will be what? Secondary consumer. So that is how that particular reaction is going to look. Alright, so I said we have grass, antelope, then lion. So our grass here is serving as our producer because it is a plant. It is an autotroph, so it will always start with the food chain, and then it is fed upon by a type of organism that has the ability to feed on grass. I couldn't have written grass and write lion here. Is it possible for lion to feed on grass?
No, sir.
So if a lion, thank you very much. So if a lion cannot feed on grass, then I shouldn't have written a kind of reaction that would look like this, where grass will be fed upon by lion. Since we know that is not possible, then that reaction will be irrelevant. It will not be It will not be right to put such reaction. So here we have grass being fed upon by what? Antelope. And antelope is an herbivore. It feeds only on what? On plants. So this particular reaction is very, very what? Correct. And then a lion, which is in this case here, the secondary consumer, because we already have primary consumer and we have what? The secondary consumer. It is only the first organism here that is going to be what? The producer. Are we together? Only the organism here is what? Is accepted as the producer. Every other thing that comes after the producer are all what's going to be referred to as the consumers. Is that clear? Is that clear? So like I was saying, we have the antelope feeding on the grass as the what? As the primary consumer, and then the lion is now feeding on the antelope. The lion serve as what? The secondary consumer. Are we making sense here?
Yes, sir.
All right. So that is what we have currently. So we need to understand that very well. That is why I'm trying to what? Emphasize on that to explain it. So this particular type of food chain that I have given here is an example of a food chain in the what? In the terrestrial habitat. Let us see another one. We have grass to grasshopper to toad to snake and then to hawk. We have our grass to be our what? Our producer. Here we have the what? First. Okay, let me just say primary consumer. Here we have our first secondary consumer, and here we have secondary consumer, and then we have our tertiary consumer. So as you can see now, we have grass here serving as our producer again, like we have in the first what? In the first reaction. It is also serving as our what? As our producer. And then we have our grasshopper to be our primary consumer. We have toad to be our what? Secondary consumer. Snake also is seen as secondary consumer, but we have to differentiate between their positions. That is why toad is seen as what? First secondary consumer, and then snake is the secondary consumer, while we have our hawk to be the what? Tertiary consumer. So you keep changing all of these consumer positions depending on the number of the trophic levels that we have. So let me quickly explain what do we refer to as trophic level. When we talk about trophic level, we're talking about the level of organisms, the number of what? Level of organisms that we have. Here we have, in this first reaction, we have 3 levels. We have grass, antelopes, and then lions. So those are 3 words levels. So we are referred to this one as a 3 trophic level what? Reaction. This particular question here, this particular equation for number 1 is what? A 3 trophic level. While this one here that has how many organisms here? We have 1, we have 2, 3, 4, 5. So this one is going to be seen as what? A 5 trophic level what? Food chain. Is that clear? So since we have, sorry please, let me quickly remove this. All right, so let's continue now. Okay. So I said we want to see another example of food chain, but in aquatic habitat. Now the ones we have treated, they are in what? They are in terrestrial habitats. So for the aquatic habitats, let's see. We want to see, we have diatoms. Let me start with planktons. Planktons being fed upon by, we have tadpole, being fed upon by fish, and then we have water snakes. So we have planktons, tadpole, fish, water snakes. So here we are having our producer, we have our primary consumer, secondary consumer, and this one is what? The tertiary consumer. Because we have just 4 trophic levels, so we can easily say we have producer, primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. Are we together? This is our what? Our producer.
Yes, sir.
So that is that about a food web. So we refer to it as what? A linear feeding relationship. You can see that all the reactions are on a straight line. Do you understand that? So the next one is going
Yes,
to,
sir.
thank you. The next one is going to be food web. The next one is going to be food web. So what is food web? What do we refer to as food web? This, or let me say, a food web is a complex feeding relationship. A complex feeding relationship involving the transfer of energy through organisms, that is from producers to consumers. So we have this example now. We have, let's see, we have this. Now, when we look at what I have drawn here, we notice that we have numerous organisms. At least in this here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 organisms in this particular chain. We have 8 organisms in this particular chain. So that is talking about the number of what organisms that we have in a food web. It does not necessarily have to be what? It does not necessarily have to be few organisms like we have in a food chain. In fact, that is one of the major difference between a food web and a food chain. So let us look at it. I said that a food web is a complex feeding. If you see here, I said it is a what? A complex feeding relationship. So why do we refer to it as being complex? One is because it has numerous chains. A food web has numerous more than one food chain. A food web has what? More than one food chain. So that is why it is referred to as what? A complex feeding relationship. Now let us look at this. Let us quickly try to map out the number of food chains that we have in this what? In this organism, in this food web rather. This is one chain. Let's do it this way.
Sir,
Can you see what I'm doing now?
yes, sir.
Alright. We have hawk, toad, grasshopper, grass. That is one chain. Let us see. This is another chain. And here we have another chain. So in this particular food chain, we have how many words? How many food in this particular food web? How many food chains do we have? Let us write them out one after the other. Remember, we will start with the what? With the producer. So in this food web, who wants to tell me which one is seen as our producer?
Grass.
The grass. The grass is seen as our what? The grass is seen as our producer. So if you are writing out the food chains, 1, we have grass to grasshopper, to toad, to hawk. Number 2, we have grass again to insects, to lizard, to snakes, and to hawk. And then the third one, we have what? We have grass to mice, and then to what? Hawk. So what we have there, they make up the what? They make up So like I was saying, we have 3 food chains in this particular food web. 3 food chains. The first one is grass to grasshopper to toad to hawk. The next one is grass to insects to lizard to snakes to hawk. And the third one is grass to mice to hawk. Now, I told us while I was explaining food chain, I said it is transfer of energy. So this is how it operates. The energy in the grass will move to grasshopper when the grasshoppers feed on the grass. Please don't ever think that it is the grass that is feeding on the grasshopper. This arrow here is not telling you that grass is feeding on the grasshopper. Instead, it is telling that what the grasshopper is feeding on the grass, and then the energy in the grass will move into the grasshopper. Remember that the grass is a what? Is a producer, so it has the ability to manufacture its own food by itself. So after producing its food by itself, then a herbivore like the grasshopper will feed on it. And then when it feeds on it, it absorbs the energy, the radiant or the solar energy in the grass is being absorbed by the what? By the herbivore. And then the energy in the grass moves into the what? Grasshopper. After which the toad feeds on the grasshopper. When toad feeds on the grasshopper, the energy that is now residing in the grasshopper will move subsequently into the toad. And when the energy moves into the toad, the energy is being transferred into the hawk when the hawk feeds on the toad. So these arrows here, they signify the what? They signify arrows signify what? They signify the transfer of energy. That is what the arrows signify. They signify the transfer of energy. So that is what that particular arrow there is doing. So energy in the grass moves into the grasshopper, the energy then moves into the toad, and then when the hawk feeds on the toad, the energy in the toad moves into the hawk. So the same thing or similar fate is what happens in the second and the third food chain that we have in that food web. Do we understand that? We could also have other types of food web. Let us see another example. We have man, uh, so this is another food web. So quickly, who can tell me the producer in this food web and the final consumer in this food web? Who can tell me the producer and the final consumer in this food web?
The producer is the grass.
The producer
The
is the
final
grass.
the final consumer is man.
The producer is grass. Fine, I accept. I agree with you. But why do you refer to man as the final consumer?
Because it feeds on the hawk.
Because it feeds on the oak. Yes. According to that chart or this web, we have the what? We have the man getting the energy from hawk, as well as the energy from what? Grass cutter. The energy in grass cutter is moving into man, and the energy in hawk is also moving into man. So man here is what? Is the final consumer, while this one is seen as what? This one here, the grass, is seen as the producer. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
So if we quickly write out the reactions, the first chain here, let's go through this place. We have grass. Yes, tell me. After grass, what do we have? We're talking about this chain here.
Grasshopper,
Grasshopper. Uh-huh.
toad,
Toad. Uh-huh.
hawk,
Uh-huh.
then man.
And then we have man. While the second one is going to be what? Grass.
Grass,
To field
field
mice.
mice,
To snake.
snake,
To hawk.
hawk,
And then
man.
to man. And we have the third one to be what? Grass. To grass cutter.
Grass, man.
And then man. Do we understand that? So
Yes, sir.
that is how that particular food web is going to be what? Interpreted. So the arrow is just signifying the what? Energy that is being transferred, and from the organism that is being transferred to the one that is accepting the what? The energy. Is that clear? Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we can quickly talk about the differences that we have between what? Between food web and food chain. We can quickly talk about the differences between food web and food chain. Differences between what? Between food chain and food web. So number one, we say that food chain is what? Food chain is a linear feeding relationship while food web is a complex feeding relationship. Food web is what? A complex feeding relationship, while food chain is a linear feeding relationship. The difference is there. We have this one to be linear and this one is what? Complex. Is that clear? Number 2. Food chain involves only one chain. While this one has what? This one has more than one chain. The complex food web has what? More than one chain. Number 3. Food chain involves what? Fewer number of organisms. While this one involves what? Numerous. Numerous number of organisms. And lastly here we have number 4. Organisms have lesser chance of survival. While in this one here, organisms have greater chance of survival. So these are the major differences that we have between what? Food web and food chain. In food chain we say that it has linear feeding relationship, while in food web it is referred to as what? A complex feeding relationship. This one, food chain, is a straight line relationship, while this one has multiple chains fused together. That is why it is referred to as what? Complex what? Feeding relationship. And then number 2 says it involves, for food chain, involves only one chain. Food chain involves what? Only one chain. Please let me quickly put this in here. Food chain involves only one chain, while food web can carry more than one. Food chain carries just one chain, but food web can carry more than one chain. If you look at the examples that we have here, we have this one having 3 food chains. This is the first chain, this is the second chain, and this is the third chain. This other example is here too has what? 3 chains. It could have 3 chains, it could have 2 chains, it could have more than those number of chains. So depending on the type of reaction that you are working on, or the type of food chain that you are working on. Are we together? And then the third one is talking about the third difference there is talking about the number of organisms that partake in that in that reaction. We have it to be what? Fewer in what? In food chain. In food chain it is usually what? Fewer. The number of organisms that we have in food chain is usually what? Fewer. So let us quickly see, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? Let us quickly go to the food chain and look at what the example there is talking about. This is where we have food chain. So let us look at this particular example. Here now, we have how many number of organisms? That is why we refer to it as what? As 5 trophic level. Because it has what? 5 what? Organisms. This one here has 3. That is why it is referred to as what? 3 trophic level. So for this particular chain, it has 3. There are 5. This one has 3. But let us look at food web, for example. Food web, for example, has more than those. In this particular one that we treated here, when we listed, we counted how many? 8. So that means the number of organisms that we have here, they are what? The number of organisms that we have in this food web, they are 8 in number. So we have 8 trophic levels here. For this one here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 as well. So we have 8 trophic levels in this what? In this food web as well. So in food web, we usually have what? Numerous what? Number of organisms. And lastly, here we have organisms have what? Lesser chance of survival. Why? Because in food chain, it is seen that all the producers are being fed up, all the producers are being fed upon by these primary consumers. These producers, they are fed upon by the primary consumer. So the primary consumer feeds on the producer. So all the plantains are expected to be fed upon by the tadpoles that we have here. Unlike, because there's no other organism that is feeding on plankton in this particular food chain. The only organism that is permitted to feed on organism in this particular food chain is the tadpole. The only organism that is expected to feed on the planktons, on the producer in this food chain is what? Is the tadpole. But let us look at the food web, for example. In this food web here, we have grass as our producer, and we have at least 3 organisms feeding directly on the producer. Let us quickly single them out. This is an example. We have grasshopper, we have insects, and we have mice. The grasshopper, the insects, the mice, they are examples of what? Of organisms that are feeding on the what? On the grass. So it is possible for the grass to have escaped being fed upon by the grasshopper, and then it falls victim of the insects. Or it also escapes the insects and falls victim of what? Of the mice. So there is a possibility of the grass having but it's a chance of survival when it is not fed upon by other organisms in what? In that particular food web. So those are the differences that we have for the what? For the food chain and the food web. So quickly, I'll talk about trophic levels. I'll talk about trophic level quickly. So want to talk about food trophic level. So what do we mean by trophic level? I'll be fast with this. Trophic levels. it refers to feeding level, the number of levels that we have for a particular chart. So when we have A to B to C to D to E, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are we together? So this particular one here is giving us what? A 5 trophic level what? Food chain. If it is A, B, C, we have 1, 2, 3. So this one here is giving us what? 3 trophic levels. If we have it to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So here we'll be having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in this one here, we refer to it as what? 8 trophic level. So the number of organisms that we have in a particular chain, in a particular feeding relationship, is what we refer to as what? As its trophic levels. So this refers to the what? Feeding levels in a feeding relationship. So that is what trophic level is about. And then we have the next one, which is what? The next one, which is referred to as, please, I'm coming. So we have the pyramid of numbers. We have pyramid of numbers. So pyramid of numbers is talking about the number of organisms that partake in what? In a particular what? Feeding relationship. So imagine that we have something like this. So here we have grass. Here we have grasshopper. Here we have lizard. And here we have hawk. So the number of grasses that is in this relationship, let's assume we have 200 grasses and we're having grasshoppers feeding on the grasses to be just about 50, and the lizards that feed on the grasshopper, we have them to be, let's say, 5, and the hawk is just one hawk that feeds on them. So this is how the pyramid of number looks. So if you look at it, the grass here has a larger bar, like a bar chart here, or is it histogram in mathematics? So it has a larger bar than the grasshopper. So that is how the number is being represented. So the grasses have larger number than the grasshopper, and than the lizard, than the hawk. Do we understand that? So if we go back to look at the question that we treated, the question says a food chain always begins with a food chain always begins with a. Option A, consumer. Option B, decomposer. Option C, producer. And option D, primary consumer. So the answer to that question is what? The answer to that question is what? Producer. The producer is the answer to that question. So as far as we have come, does anybody have any question for me? Does anybody have any question for me?
No, sir.
You understand everything we have treated today?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. So I think we'll have to end our class here today. So we'll pick it up from there when next we see. Is that clear?
Yes.